Welcome, everybody, to episode 157 Two Goalies, One Mike, brought to you by Fatty Beer Company, Western New York's premier market and tap room, with over 300 beers to choose from at 8 different Western New York locations. Fatty Beer is the premier spot for all of your happy hour needs, whether it's to partake in a Buffalo Bison's televised game, Toronto Blue Jays game right here in the summer, or the NHL Finals, or the Stanley Cup Finals, sorry. And, of course, Buffalo Logo Apparel, one of the greatest spots to get any of your locally designed Buffalo sports apparel needs, from your shirts, your hats, your hoodies. They literally have everything. You can find them both at Buffalo Logo Co. on Instagram and Twitter, at Fatty Beer on Instagram and Twitter, fattybeer.com and buffalogo.com. I am joined by my co-host, my special co-host, my guest co-host, the play-by-play man for the Guelph Storm and the Instigating Podcast, Ryan Drury, friend of the program and returning guest. One of my favorite interviews we always have on here, Mike Harrington from Buffalo News. How are you both doing, guys?
Doing well.
Gentlemen, good evening. Thanks for having me again.
Not a problem, man. A lot to talk about. The Stanley Cup Finals got here pretty quick. Just seems like a week ago we were talking about the opening round. But two teams that I don't know if most slated to be here in this spot. Maybe Florida, after obviously them being here last year, but I definitely didn't have the Edmonton Oilers in the spot for the West. My pick was Vancouver, and I owe a good buddy of mine dinner due to that. But Vancouver was my pick. Obviously, they overcame a lot to get as far as they did with the goaltending and Brock Besser being hurt, but they couldn't overcome everything, and Edmonton was able to prevail to get to the finals. But I'm just going to start with you, Mike. Just your initial thoughts on this matchup going in. A lot of former Sabres, of course. The Florida Panthers, known as Sabre South, and just your feelings on who might have the upper hand.
Well, believe it or not, I picked Edmonton back in October. Now, they certainly took a circuitous path here, starting 2-9-1 and firing the coach. You didn't expect that to happen, but
Definitely not, no.
I did pick Edmonton and Carolina, and I was pretty stuck on that, but Carolina didn't get past the Rangers. And once Edmonton got their season rolling, I really liked their chances. Certainly they have two of the best 4 or 5 players in the world. The question really was, did the defense and goaltending hold up? And Stuart Skinner was a big doubt in the Vancouver series. He got yanked for a while. But Stuart Skinner basically outplayed Jake Ottinger in the Western Conference Final. And that's a big reason Edmonton's here. It's interesting to me that both of these teams, were down 2-1 and ran off 3 straight wins to get to the Stanley Cup Final, when it looked like we might be heading for a New York-Dallas series. And those were the top 2 teams in the standings this year. So now you have Connor McDavid finally making his first appearance in the Cup Final in year 9, the year after Jack Eichel got his cup, against the Florida Panthers. And, the Panthers are the first team to go back to the Cup Final in a year after they lost it since the Penguins in 2009. The Penguins lost to Detroit in 2008, and in 2009, you remember they beat the Red Wings, the 7-game series that ended with the Marc-Andre Fleury save. So the Panthers have the experience of the Stanley Cup Final. There's a few guys in Edmonton that do also. Certainly Corey Perry's playing in his 5th one. But a real contrast in styles, and to me, McDavid and Draisaitl have to be elite world-class players, because as we've seen in these first 3 rounds, the Panthers are very deep. They played great defensive hockey. Bobrovsky is great, but the real key to me is look at the job Alexander Barkov has done against prime players on the other teams. Look at the job he did in the most recent series, shutting down the New York Rangers, shutting down Artemi Panarin, Mika Zibanejad. Barkov has been terrific against other teams' elite offensive players. He hasn't played someone the likes of Connor McDavid, though, and that to me is going to be an incredible thing to watch. And we'll see what happens. And, Sabre South, like you say. The whole world's rooting for Kyle Okposo, right? Come on. The guy.
We'll get to that. We'll get to that.
But I like the series as a whole. I like the star power we have. The Panthers are a love them or hate them team. I think it'll be fun. I don't like 17 days for the Stanley Cup final, but it is what it is thanks to television and travel, and we'll just see where it goes.
I'm going to let Ryan jump in, but the one thing I do want to say is on the Alexander Barkov comment. I think he is one of the most, I don't want to say underrated, but least talked about stars in the league. You know what I mean? Like he does everything the right way. He's a guy that can go out there and score 90 to 100 points at any given season. Defensively, he is an absolute stud. He's responsible. He's a good leader. And that's what guy, I mean, I don't know if because you have Steven Stamkos down there in Florida too, it just doesn't get talked about enough.
Well, and you didn't really start talking about Patrice Bergeron and Anze Kopitar until they started winning Stanley Cups.
Yeah.
And Stanley Cup Finals. Barkov's profile has immeasurably jumped. He's won some Selkies now, and they've made the Stanley Cup Final 2 years in a row, and he is making those conversations that he should have been making earlier that he had not been.
Ryan?
Yeah, I agree on Barkov. Like, I think he's one of those guys that, I mean, to me, he reminds me a lot of Pavel Datsyuk. And I mean, it's not just his two-way acumen. It's the way that he can create offense as well. Very similar skill level. Both those guys could dangle out of a phone booth. And Barkov has turned himself into a guy that is really a go-to name when you're talking about guys that can dominate the entire sheet. Like, he can go out there and take a big defensive zone draw. He can kill a penalty. He can, of course, run a power play because he's got some filthy mitts. And he can kind of take a game over himself offensively if he wants to as well, because he's so elusive in the offensive zone. And, you know, Mike brought up a couple names that kind of fit that same billing in Bergeron and Kopitar. Like, there are a lot of elite offensive players in the game that can score. There are a lot of good defensive players that can shut people down. Guys like him are an extreme rarity in the NHL. I would actually venture to say that forwards that are that dynamic at both ends of the ice might be more rare than big number one defensemen. Like, it's really hard to find a guy where you could say that from the opponent's blue line in, I trust that guy to generate a goal when we need it. And from our blue line back, I trust him to go out there and not allow us to get scored on. Like, a forward like that is just so rare.
Yeah, you have 15 elite number one defensemen in this league. There are not 15 Alexander Barkovs in the NHL.
No way. No way. And I think your comparables, Mike, we're dead nuts on. You know, your Kopitar, your Bergeron. I mean, Bergeron essentially owned the Selke Trophy for how long? Like, he was either winning it or he was nominated for it, and rightfully so. The guy just, in terms of leadership and just, I mean, let's be real. If Zdeno Chara wasn't damn near lifelong Bruin, he would have, you know, Bergeron's the captain of that team. I don't think it's even debatable, but you can't find a much more reliable guy than Bergeron, and to be compared to a player like that in Barkov. I mean, again, it's, you know, Florida really has a gem there in him, and I'm not sure of his age and, like, you know, how old he is or how long in the tooth he is, but I'm happy to see him have another crack here, more than really anybody on that team, even with all the former Sabres, because I always find it tragic when you have players like that are so good all over the ice, and, you know, they finish their career without winning a cup.
And we have the great trivia answer in this series too. You know, you talk about storylines. This is the first Stanley Cup final in NHL history where the top four picks of any draft are in the series. You think back to 10 years ago in 2014 in Philadelphia, who were the top four picks in the draft? Aaron Ekblad, Sam Reinhart, and Draisaitl.
Wow, yeah.
All in the Stanley Cup final 10 years later.
Yeah. It's funny, three of them ended up on Florida, which is wild. You know, Sam Bennett, you know, I think he really turned things around about starting like 2 years ago from his time in Calgary. It's really started to finally, you know, I want to say a glass ceiling or kind of live up to where he was picked in the draft, because I don't think he ever would, but like became a very dependable, you know, grinder type player, as we saw in the Boston series, where he fed Marchand pretty good and, you know, gave him a little taste of his own medicine. The The only thing I found hilarious about that whole situation was when he was interviewed after the next game, and they asked him. He goes, "Oh, it was a hockey play." And you watch the replay in slow motion. There was nothing about that. That was a hockey play. You punched him in the back of the head.
It was not a hockey play.
It was not a hockey play.
You know?
But again, it's Marchand. He's done that how many times?
Right. And the biggest thing is all the controversy of that. When Marchand came back, what did he do? He didn't complain about it at all. He said, "Hey, I'm on the other side of that a few times." So
he's done it. I respect that too.
Yeah,
I respect that. Guys like Sam Bennett and guys like Brad Marchand, you love to hate them. You hate them so much, but you would love to have them on your team. And if there's anybody in the league, any fan of the league that would say they would not want either of those guys on their team, they're absolutely lying, because they're the type of players that get under your skin. Pardon?
Toronto. No Leafs fan wants Brad Marchand on their team.
Well, unless they'll root for him when he's playing for Team Canada, though, when he's on a line with Sid the Kid.
Grudgingly.
Yeah, begrudgingly. But no, I love that style of hockey, and that's something that I think Buffalo has been lacking for a while. Maybe not sucker punching guys, but just playing that hard grinding type style of hockey that we haven't really honestly seen here in almost a decade, at least not consistently.
And the other thing to look at here, I always try to look at these things in the prism of the Sabres. This is 6 years in a row we've had an Atlantic Division team in the Stanley Cup Final. So that just shows you what the Sabres and Detroit and Ottawa and Montreal and even the Leafs are dealing with, having a team from their division good enough to go to the final 6 years in a row. When you go back to 2019 to Boston, followed by Tampa's 3 trips, and now Florida going 2 years in a row. And it just shows you that, the Sabres, you want the Sabres to make a breakthrough. And it's a tough road when you have teams good enough in your division to go to the final 6 years in a row. And that little triumvirate at the top of the division for a while was Boston, Tampa, Toronto. And now it's really become Florida, Boston, Toronto, and Tampa's clearly number 4. So it's a hard problem for these teams in the bottom of the Atlantic Division to see someone from their division advancing through the playoffs every year, taking out the Rangers and the Capitals and Carolina and Pittsburgh. And, that's pretty wild. 6 years in a row, the Atlantic Division's ended up in the final.
Yeah, it just goes to show how tough of a division the Atlantic is. Drury, I'll let you hop in here just because obviously I know you have a lot to share on that one too.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where I think that they're kind of staring up, the Sabres are, up the ladder at teams that have kind of had the benefit of building their rosters properly, mostly through the draft. Like, you look at Tampa, did they add guys? Yes, but most of the guys that they added were ancillary pieces. Hagel, before that, they tried to bring in guys like Callahan. Of course, McDonough came over and was a big part. He's going back there now. But the core of that team was drafted and developed there. The goaltender was drafted and developed. Kucherov, Stamkos, Cirelli, who's a guy that doesn't get talked about a lot there. I watched him in the OHL. He's a very underrated player in the NHL. And, of course, Braden Point. And you look at Florida, and it's the same type of thing. I mean, yes, have they added guys over the years to complement that roster? Of course they have. You look at Reinhart and Bennett, the guys that we've run down, Brandon Montour as well. But the heart of that team is Barkov, it's Ekblad, and it's guys that they've kind of built their stock around. And the Sabres for a long time have had a really tough time doing that. Jack Eichel was supposed to be that guy. It obviously didn't work out the way everybody wanted it to. And I know a lot of people there still sore that he ended up winning a cup elsewhere. But I do think still, and we've talked about this a lot of times on here, Duane, I do like the young core of talent that they already have in place. And I like a lot of the prospects that are on the way. It's just going to be a matter of, can Buffalo figure out a way across 82 games to consistently match not even necessarily the skill level of those teams, but the battle level and the details. Florida, detail-oriented team. Edmonton, it's not a mistake that they're here. Yes, maybe it surprised some people. Look at the underlying numbers. They are a very detail-oriented team. And it took them a long time to figure that out, by the way. Like, even with McDavid, it's taken them a while to get to this level. One Western Conference final appearance where they really fell apart. A number of first and outs, a couple second and outs. Like, it took this team a long time to learn how to be that detail oriented, right? So Buffalo is a team that's going to have to learn how to do that across 82 games. And then you're in the playoffs and you've got to ramp that up even more. I don't think they're super far away. I obviously think Boston will fall away a little bit now. I mean, I feel like we've said that for the last 3 years, but I really feel like that's going to happen a little more now. Toronto's a complete wild card. We have no idea what they're going to do, if they're going to do anything big to start the summer off. Ottawa is a complete coin flip too, because they're just as much, if not more, in the same situation that the Sabres are. I mean, you talk about inconsistency. That program just has not taken off at all. Like, they have an opportunity to sneak in there and potentially do some damage, but it's going to take Lindy Ruff getting these guys to understand that you got to take care of the entire ice sheet and not just be chasing points.
No, I don't really agree with you about Florida. Florida's not a team. They're not a draft and develop team in my eyes. I mean, you look at, other than Barkov and Ekblad, most of the other guys are trade acquisitions. They had a 122-point team that they basically blew up. They got rid of the coach. They traded for Reinhart. They made the trade for Tkachuk. They got Bennett. Bobrovsky's not a Bobrovsky was an acquisition. I think Florida's a little bit of an outlier. I think Buffalo, Toronto, Tampa are built through prospects and built through the draft. Florida is not. And most of these teams that get to this point, frankly, are the draft and develop model. Certainly Edmonton is. They've added, but what you say, Ryan, is true, is where Edmonton has gone right is they've added pieces. They've added a Matthias Ekholm. They've added, Evander Kane and Corey Perry and Zach Hyman. But Florida's kind of the same way. I mean, so what Buffalo has done is Buffalo, I tell people all the time, this is your team. If the Sabres ever get good, ever win the Stanley Cup, it's going to be most of these guys. They've paid their guys. What they have not done yet is built around. Where Florida and Edmonton has succeeded is building around their core. Who is the Sabres' complementary players around Dahlin and Cousins and Thompson and Tuck and all these guys? That's what they're still trying to figure out. But Florida, to me, is just an unbelievable case study because realistically, I don't think you could do what they did in any other market. Who blows up and makes big moves and gets rid of the coach from a 122-point team? You could really only do that in a market where nobody's paying a lot of attention. It'd be chaos to do that in a.
It definitely helps not having a state income tax either.
Sure, but I mean, it also helps not having all kinds of media covering the team. They used to have 3 beat writers traveling to every game. No one covers the Florida Panthers on the road anymore. So there's not a lot of attention. So when they got rid of the coach and when they traded Huberdeau, and a lot of people said they were crazy. You don't do that. You just run it back when you have 120 points. They didn't, and they made the big move. You know what it reminds me of, guys? It reminds me of the 1990-91 Toronto Blue Jays. Something the Blue Jays need to do now. What did they do? They had won for like 6 years in a row, and they traded. Unbelievable. They traded George Bell and Tony Fernandez. Why? Those are the core of the team. What are you doing? And they brought in Joe Carter and Roberto Alomar. And what happened? They won 2 World Series in a row. That's kind of what the Florida Panthers remind me of a little. Making that kind of trade, bringing in Tkachuk, getting rid of Huberdeau, changing the coach. It's a wild story.
Yeah, it really is, and you really highlighted a lot there. You really don't have any. There isn't a ton of stress playing in Florida because if you lose, you lose. There isn't a spotlight on the Florida Panthers when they lose. The only thing you can really say is when they are losing, it's like it's worse than in Buffalo when it comes to attendance. it stinks. Like, that's why they probably don't get a lot of nationally televised hockey games throughout the season, on TNT or ESPN when they are, before. ESPN's only been around, but if they weren't good, they wouldn't be getting a lot of really many televised games because who wants to look at a 3/4 of an empty arena?
The Sabres have the longest playoff drought in NHL history, right?
Yep.
Who have the next 2 longest playoff droughts in NHL history?
Probably the Panthers.
Florida
Panthers and the Edmonton Oilers.
Yep. We're next. I like it.
It can happen. It can someday turn around.
Yes, I couldn't agree with you more. Because there were a couple points there that you made that I definitely want to touch on. One thing but before I get to that, I do definitely want to touch on the Kyle Okposo comments when he interviewed was about a week ago about his time in Buffalo and what went wrong. A lot of the things that have been, especially, how things go on Sabres Twitter, some polarizing comments about him recognizing major issues as early as the first month of the season. It's not Kyle Okposo's fault this team fell off the rails. It's not. I was in a group chat earlier where, we were kind of talking about this. A lot of guys that I've grown up playing hockey with, to what he spoke about, recognizing that they weren't the same team as the year before, that they just didn't have it. He didn't say exactly that, but he pretty much did. How much of that is at the feet of the coach? And how much of that also falls on the guy, not just him, but the guys wearing letters. And, obviously you can't as a player, order a bag skate or, whatever. You don't really see that very often anymore, which I don't like because I think it is effective to a certain extent. But how much of that is on the guys on your team that wear letters too? Because that's something, I don't think anybody really expected those comments to come from Kyle, especially recognizing that early in the season and essentially not doing anything about it. You guys are in the media. Was there any player-only meetings called? Not that would have a dramatic effect or turn the season around, but was anything ever, done like that, from what you guys saw?
They didn't do anything like that post-game. They met in the hotel quite a bit on the road. I think whether we agree or not, clearly the organization blamed the coach. They fired the coach. One problem Kyle had, I think, it was a little bit reminiscent of Brian Giunta. Great captain. Kyle was a fine captain. It's hard to be a great captain when your own game is off, when you're struggling to contribute. And Kyle had a run here later in the season where he started to score and started to contribute, but I think it was 18, 19 games into the season, he didn't have a goal. Mm-hmm. He ended up in double figures. But I think when your own game is off, it's hard to really lead. And a lot of what happened here was hindsight. We felt training camp was a little off. They played 5 games in 7 days. They played that Hockeyville game, and it just didn't seem like they were playing their team. They were messing around with too many prospects, combinations. They never got their team together. And I had, Eric Johnson said it to me, guys, and we published it. The first game he played with his team on the bench was a season opener. It was too soft a training camp, not soft and not hard training camp. They weren't practicing hard. It was too soft in formulating your team.
Yeah.
And that became an issue. And that's why I think they were chasing the season. They weren't ready to go. The real, the flashpoint for me was the first game.
That was a rough one to watch against the Rangers, I believe.
The season opener against the Rangers, you can't get your head handed to you at home the first night of the year when people think this is a playoff season. And they just weren't competitive in that game, and they struggled. They chased the season in October. And the other thing, it's crazy to think now, they played Eric Comrie in net before they played UPL. They didn't play UPL till the 7th game of the season. Mm-hmm. Levi was the best goalie in training camp. No question. Levi should have started the opener. No question. Levi shouldn't have played the first 4 games.
No, not 4 in a row. No.
And by doing that, they got him hurt. So they set him back. And so Levi's hurt. So now we'll go to the next guy. They go to Comrie.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell people all the time, and throw out the last game of the year when Comrie won. Comrie went 1-7.
Yeah.
Take some of those points and see where the team is. And you say, well, he didn't get a lot of goal support, and he didn't. It's like the run support for a pitcher. Well, one of the reasons he didn't get a lot of goal support was the players had to hang back, and I don't think they had a lot of confidence in him making saves. 1-7, take his 1-7 out, give the team some points, more than 2 out of the 16 points, see where they are. So to me, there were some serious decisions made by the front office and the coach that negatively impacted the season right from the start. And then the injuries pile up and the frustration, whatever. But yeah, I think they're blaming the coach. They fired the coach, and we'll see if they were right.
Drury, just in your experience of just covering hockey, and obviously you're a diehard Capitals fan, so you've had Ovechkin as your captain for as long as any of us can remember. So obviously compete level and skill doesn't really play into that when it comes to you when we're talking about Cal. But like when you hear when you hear a captain say something like that, and I totally agree with Mike's points. Like it's hard to speak to certain things when your game isn't up to par either, and hold it when when you hear stuff like, hey, I noticed that, essentially from game 1, we didn't have it. And not a lot from a player standpoint was done culture wise, in the locker room wise. When you hear stuff like that from a former captain, like what's your initial reaction?
The one thing I would equate it to as a Caps fan was that 2003, 2004 season when, the year before they made that big trade to bring Jágr in, and it was supposed to be the rise of the Capitals. Like Alexander Ovechkin doesn't happen for the Capitals if the Jágr experiment doesn't go disastrously wrong and they sell off all those pieces. The year prior, the Tampa Bay Lightning absolutely dismantled the Capitals in the playoffs. Jágr was a ghost. And I remember back in those days and hearing some of the guys from that team talk about it years later, guys that I really respected and loved as a kid, like Steve Konowalchuk and Anson Carter and Peter Bondra, Kolzig, like guys like that talking, just saying it just felt like the whole team was centered around one guy and it was basically a PR experiment and no one really felt like the team was cohesive. Like when you hear stuff like that as a fan, you're like, well, what am I spending all my money on? Like if that's what I'm hearing from guys in the room, what exactly is it that is enticing me to go to the rink tonight if there's a game? Like if I can deal with, okay, the team's not very good. And I did deal with that for a couple seasons. Like I knew that the Caps were going to be very bad and I was fine with that. What fans can't stand, and it drives me crazy when people go like, oh, in market X, Montreal's doing it right now. They've been doing it forever. Market X, the fans will not stand for a rebuild. Yes, they will. Like, we're not stupid. We understand. Look at what the Rangers did. They sent that letter out and everyone was like, okay, I guess we're going to be bad for a few years. And the team communicated it very clearly and said, look, we're not good enough. We need to reset and rebuild. And everybody, the Rangers aren't a big market. They don't care about hockey there. Sure looked like it to me this year. If you clearly communicate something to a fan base, they're going to stomach it. What fans can't stomach is when it looks like the team's not trying. And it's one thing to have guys not like each other maybe, or there's some drama in the room, fine. But as fans, when we pay money, seemingly more money every year for these tickets to go to the games, what we expect in the very least is to get effort for that money and to have the players show up and look like they care about success. And when you take comments like what Kyle said, it's concerning because it not only makes you wonder, okay, what's the future of this team, especially in a situation like Buffalo, where, as Mike pointed out, like everybody's locked up. Like these guys aren't going anywhere. They're in Buffalo. Like the core of this team is the core, unless massively drastic changes happen. So you start to wonder, okay, is this the right direction? But then on top of that, it makes you start wondering, well, who's the problem? Where's the problem in the room? And then the speculation starts and rumors start flying around. Like it can really drive a wedge into a room when a guy like that comes out. And I would expect that those guys, Cousins and Darlene and Thompson and Tuck, I would expect all of those guys, there's really two options here. They can take those comments, internalize them, and go, you know what, he's right. And we all need to come together collectively and be way, way better to start next year and actually get some gasoline in the tank here and get this thing to take off finally. Or they can all take it personally and go, he must be talking about me, and they can sulk and whine about it and have this continue to just go nowhere and be lost in the fog. That's really their only option.
They better not sulk and whine because Lindy Ruff.
They can't. They can't. And Mike, I'm very curious your take on Lindy coming back, because he's a guy that represents a lot of great things to Sabres fans. I'm sure, you know, in your dealings with them in the media, like he represents one thing you can say for Lindy is he always represents hard work and integrity, and he will not settle for guys not working hard. And I think that that's kind of what the Sabres need. I genuinely wonder what your thoughts were when that got announced.
Yeah, I mean, I knew that was coming. I mean, I could tell, you know, right near the end of Granado, even that Ottawa game, I mean, they're going to bring Lindy Ruff in here. I knew Terry Pagula was interested. I knew Lindy was interested 5 years ago. Botterill wouldn't hire him, hired Kruger. They just had to sit down, Kevin and Lindy, and hammer it out. You know, let's be honest, guys. We're not going to run the clock back here to 2007.
No.
Immediately. You know, that's a whole different animal with a whole different team. Lindy will have accountability, but Lindy's not Lindy. You know, Lindy's not going over the boards at guys and screaming, yelling at practice. You don't do that anymore. I mean, he even said he had to learn how to be a different coach in New Jersey because you had guys who weren't going to respond to that. Having said that, Lindy knows this team needs a push. There's enough talent here. They're coming off a season where they underachieved. A lot of these players are going to hopefully have a chip on their shoulder about the way they underachieved this year. And Lindy's going to push them in certain areas. He's going to push them, like the Florida Panthers, to be tougher to play against. Dylan Cousins saying we're soft and need to be harder to play against got basically pushed down by the GM. Don't say those things in public to the media. Well, you know, Dylan Cousins said that in December at Carolina, and he was right. They were soft a lot of the time. I don't expect the Sabres to be soft anymore with Lindy Ruff as the coach. There'll be other technical things. You know, the power play, I assume, will be better. Seth Appert will run a good power play. Lindy will run a good power play. You know, but again, it really comes down to, you know, let's not forget here, Lindy got fired. It was a great 17-year run. He got fired. He can't do it all himself. It's going to come down to roster construction. It's going to come down to building the depth in this team. But I think bringing Lindy in is a little bit of a desperation move, because what were you going to sell this year? You can't sell Darlene or Cousins or Thompson or whoever because they're just coming off a disappointing train wreck of a season. Well, gee, who's on the billboards? Who's on the television commercials? Who's on the website? Who's calling season ticket holders saying, please come back? Thanks for coming back. Lindy Ruff is. So this is a major hockey move, but don't look the other way. This is a major business move, too, for this franchise.
It's like when the Bills signed Terrell Owens. Sure. like there was no reason for that other than to sell tickets. Right. Not saying that Lindy isn't going to help get this team to the playoffs. I genuinely think he will. I genuinely think Lindy Ruff will help end this playoff drought.
If he can't, if he can't,
who is at this point? Like, I mean, like, blow it all up.
I know. God.
It's at that point, it's a cultural thing that can't be fixed. Like, if a guy like Lindy can't come in, and to your point, you're not expecting him to come in here and throw a water cooler across the room, or like what Billy Bean did in Moneyball with the baseball bat and the boombox, which I would love to see. Don't get me wrong, because I think that this team needed that more than anything last year, is Kevin Adams to come down in the locker room and start destroying some stuff and start making feel people feel accountable. But
And
accountability.
he did. And the one thing that I think is underplayed is people bemoan the Middlestat trade. The Middlestat trade was a good trade from the standpoint of you're not going to pay him. You got a good quality young defenseman. The Middlestat trade was also about shaking up that room and trying to make some people uncomfortable and trading one of everybody's friends, trading one of the main guys. That's Rasmus Dahlin's, your $11 million defenseman, his best friend in the entire room got traded. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of hidden meaning to the Middlestat trade. And it was exactly what you just said, Duane. They needed a little bit of a wake-up call, and it woke guys up. There's no question about it. And there might be another move like that, another seismic move coming. We don't know. But the Middlestat trade certainly shook up that room, and people suddenly realized this really, 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 really is a business. And it's not just we don't all get paid and go off kumbaya and happy ever after. Sometimes guys get sent packing.
Agreed. Accountability is definitely the top of the list, and I think that, to your point with the Middlestat trade, you mean obviously that's a shake-up move. That's again, you didn't plan on bringing him back, but you got a good, in my opinion, high-ceiling defenseman in Bowen Byram, who was relied upon a lot during that Stanley Cup run for Colorado. He was playing like 24 minutes a night. Yes, I think it was like a rookie in his first year as a rookie, even. I think it was his first season. You got a quality defenseman there, but to your point, like you traded your potential future captain's best friend. Like that's his best friend. They were roommates. Yeah. Like, I mean, like that's do they even go to Dahlin when they make that trade and ask him how he feels about it? No. They just went and did it. They went and did what needed to be done.
You're a player. The GM's the GM. You don't ask the player's opinion on a trade.
No.
You make the trade. They were in Toronto. Dahlin was taking a nap when that trade happened. It was game day in Toronto. So no, the GM did his job. He was the GM. And if you're a player and you disagree, that's fine. But he was doing what he thought was best at the time. And we'll see how it plays out. It's not like Middlestat. I loved how Middlestat played in Colorado, and everybody got all hyped up about his comments. And there was nothing wrong with how hard the Sabres practiced. Yes, Colorado practices faster. They have Nathan MacKinnon on their team.
Yep.
That's why they practice faster. There's nothing inherently wrong with how, believe me, we watch practice every day. We saw how they practiced under Kruger and Housley. They practiced at a whole other level under Granato. This whole bunch of crap that is talked about on social media all the time is simply wrong. And everybody took Middlestat's comments out of context, didn't understand what he was saying. They have Nathan MacKinnon. That's why Colorado practices so much harder and faster.
Another thing too is they do play at a much higher altitude up there too. So I wonder if that played into it as well.
That's what he meant. He said those things after a morning skate. You've got to practice at a different level at that altitude to get your body moving. That's why visiting teams struggle when they go up there. I mean, so that whole thing was just sometimes like, the situation with Okposo. I wasn't in the room when Okposo said that. He said that down in Florida. A lot of these things nowadays take on a life of their own. It's like the little drill you have in second grade, and you whisper in a kid's ear and you say 3 words and tell them to say the next kid, say the 3 words to the next kid, and see what you get by the time you've gone through 25 kids. And it's nothing what was said at the beginning. So that's kind of how this stuff goes. And it really, you can tell it agitates me from time to time. But, again, people want to say, oh, the Sabres weren't practicing hard. All the people that say that should say hi to me at practice every day. They're not there.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with you 100%. I'm going to let Drury start this one off just because I know you're going to have a lot to say about this, Mike. And I'm fairly positive I'm going to agree with you, Mike. Sabres pick at 11th in this draft. They have a handful of prospects that are going to push to be on this roster next year. It's my opinion that you should trade that pick if the plan is that at least those top 3 prospects aren't going to be on your roster next year. I think it's a big fail, in my opinion, to not trade that pick for a rostered player. How do you feel about that, Ryan? Do you think Buffalo should invest in what is supposed to be a deeper draft? Again, not very top heavy, but deeper. You obviously seeing a lot of the junior talent covering the Guelph Storm and seeing, the players they play against. What is your opinion of that? Should the Sabres stay at 11 and hopefully push that one of their prospects are NHL ready next year? Or do you think they should make that deal for a player that's going to slot into the lineup next season?
I personally think that they should start to add some ancillary talent to this group, and preferably a veteran guy that can come in there and make a big difference. And preferably it would be somebody that is a detail-oriented player, somebody that can make an impact at both ends of the ice. I think that they're pretty set at defense, just in terms of the high-end pairings. Like, you bring Byram in there and you've already got Duane and Power. Like, you've got the makings of a really great decor for the next, 8 to 10 years, potentially. It's at forward where I think that they lack some discipline in terms of playing the right way all over the ice. I think they have a lot of good prospects on the way still. And if you could turn that number 11 into a guy that can make a really big difference on your team, when you look at guys that have been added by teams like Vegas over the years, adding a guy like Mark Stone, which made a huge difference. I know he's not a popular guy to bring up because of the cap stuff. I get it. But Mark Stone is a difference maker when he's on the ice and healthy. Reinhart, who was in Buffalo, down in Florida. If you can take that pick and give it to a team that needs that pick, that's in a real rebuild mode, and get somebody that can come in and make a big difference on your roster, just in terms of showing guys the right way to do things. The talent is there on Buffalo. Like, there's lots of talent here. I mean, there's a guy down the middle of your team that scored 50 goals. Like, there's plenty of talent here, and first overall picks in Duane and good young goaltenders. The talent's there. It's all about those details. So I feel like if there's somebody that they can go and get that Kevin Adams feels is going to make a tangible difference on the way this team approaches games, not even necessarily plays them, but how they approach games and their mindset in different situations, trailing late in the third period, a big penalty kill, a much needed goal on a power play coming up. If they can go and get somebody that can lead these guys in the right direction and help pull them along, I think that would be a smarter play, because I do think they're still pretty prospect rich.
Well, I think they should trade the pick. I don't expect them to. In general, NHL GMs are not daring at the draft. It used to drive Tim Murray crazy. He wanted to do NBA sign and trades all the time. Nobody would do it with him. Nobody would dance with him. How many first-round picks get traded in the NHL? It doesn't happen very often, guys. It really doesn't. You look back the last 10 or 15 years, how many first-round picks get traded in advance of the draft?
Unless it's happened at the deadline, not very often.
Not very often.
It's so rare because of the cap now, right? Because teams need those young guys.
Right. They need young guys. So that's the first problem. The second problem developed, basically yesterday and today in Buffalo at the Combine, when Tom Fitzgerald of the Devils talked to NHL.com, who was the only access to the Combine pretty much during the week, and said the number 10 pick would be in play. Well, we all know the Devils need a goalie. That's why Lindy's coaching the Sabres now, because they didn't get him a goalie and he got fired. And after he got fired, they went and traded for 2 goalies. They traded for Allen and Kakin. Well, they need a real goalie. Well, can the Devils trade the number 10 pick to the Boston Bruins for Linus Ullmark? Couldn't that be in play with Nashville for UC Saros, or with Calgary for,
Markstrom, yeah.
Markstrom, right. So it's going to be tough if the number 10 pick is out there for the Sabres to trade the number 11 pick. So that's another complicating factor. I think Kevin Adams needs to trade the number 11 pick for an NHL player, because I think if the Sabres go belly up again this year and don't make the playoffs, Kevin Adams is out of a job. And it isn't going to matter who he picks at number 11, who's going to play in 2 or 3 years, because he's not going to be the GM. That's just my opinion, that I think Kevin Adams is in serious trouble if they don't make the playoffs under Lindy in year one.
Completely agree.
You know, it's a hard problem. You know, and again, okay, like you say, let's trade the number 11 pick. It is the number 11 pick. Are you going to trade the number 11 pick for a third line center? I don't know. You know, Scott Laughton. You're going to trade the number 11 pick for Scott Laughton? I don't know.
No.
You know, Kevin's in a bind. You know, I'm trading the number 11 pick. I want a top 4 defenseman or a top 6 forward, except I don't need a top 4 defenseman. And I might not need a top 6 forward. I need bottom 6 forwards in this team. I need a better third pair defenseman. So I think the Sabres are completely fascinating, because we know the Devils are trading the number 10 pick trying to get a goalie if they trade it. I don't know what the Sabres are going to get with the number 11 pick. And I just think it makes them super interesting to follow going into the draft and on draft day to see, you know, do they just suck it up and take another kid, or do they do something creative or something we don't even expect?
And one thing too is, you know, and they'll transition that into this next, because there's been a lot of, you know, NHL rumor mill stuff, you know, certain players being on the block going into the draft. Obviously the season's winding down. We're heading into the finals. Guys like Rasmus Anderson, whose name has been in talks a lot out of Calgary. Martin Necas out of Carolina, young 25-year-old forward coming off a 50-plus point season, would probably slot into if you're a Buffalo, you know, definitely probably a third line player that could easily fill into your top 6, which, you know, having that type of versatility, it would be really nice. Is he exactly what Buffalo needs? Probably not. Again, I'm more of a sandpaper guy, and then the name at the top of the list, just like his brother a couple of years ago, has been consistently Brady Tkachuk, and how happy he is in Ottawa.
Yeah. That's garbage. Even Steve Stais already said this week they're not trading him. He's the face of the team. They're not. Brady Tkachuk is not getting traded. It's social media narrative. He's the face of the team. They got a new GM. They got a new coach. Brady Tkachuk. People have to stop talking about Brady Tkachuk. And if the Senators were trading Brady Tkachuk, the last team in the league they would trade Brady Tkachuk to is the Buffalo Sabres.
A division team, yeah.
It's the same spot as they are.
Yeah, and another thing too is it's like any trade you make with a division opponent, like, it's going to be a massive overpay. Right. Like, that conversation starts with players like Dylan Cousins or Owen Power or Jack Quinn. Yeah. You got to be willing to part with players like that in order to bring in a Brady Tkachuk, which is why I even if he was available, like, you know, again, I was speaking on Twitter in like hypotheticals, like, you're going to have to massively overpay, and it's going to start with players that you might not want to part with. Like, and those 3 probably be at the very top of that list.
Brady Tkachuk's going nowhere. That's just silly, stupid social media rumor.
So, your thoughts, Ryan, on the obviously you know, you follow the league just as much as I do. Any player that's been mentioned a lot in trade talk that you think would fit the bill for Buffalo?
Well, not Brady Tkachuk, you know, for the myriad of reasons that Mike just went over. I agree. Like, Ottawa, like, they would have to, I think that in order for a guy like him to get traded, they would need to go through a few more seasons like the last one, where they're really bottoming out and going, okay, we've got to hit the reset button again, which would drive fans there crazy. I just think that he's a staple. He might play his whole career there. Like, he loves it there. It's a little different than Matthew, where like he was kind of like, hey, I'm kind of over Calgary. Like, can you get me out of here? I don't get the sense that that's the case, you know, for Brady. But, you know, it's one of those things for Buffalo where I also agree with Mike in the drafting. Like, it is a tough thing to do. It's tough to trade those picks and get high impact guys. And it's going to take the perfect trade partner basically to find it. And it's going to be tougher for them to do it in division, but you are going to have to look toward a team, I think, potentially like Utah, where they're a team that's going to come in and try and make a mark right away. And the way that they can potentially do that, much like Vegas did the second year, because the first year they basically ran with the roster that they had, went to the improbable run to the Cup final, and then they went, oh wow, that was actually pretty good. We're going to start just being the most aggressive trade partner in the NHL in the last 20 years. I mean, the ins and outs there, and we're going to see it again this offseason too. Like, Jonathan Marchessault's gone. It's crazy the turnover that they've had in Vegas. Utah might be the franchise where I think a lot of teams will line up, because there are some quality guys down there that you could potentially get. They might be the trade partner that everybody lines up with and says, you know, we'll give you all these picks to try and set yourself up for the future. Give us some of the quality players that you have right now. They might be the team that gets targeted a lot. Outside of that, it's really hard to tell right now what other teams are feeling, especially the playoff teams. But I think that there are probably some non-playoff teams that Buffalo could try and target that have some quality players that would love that number 11 pick. But it's going to take the perfect kind of trade partner, because like Mike pointed out, like, you can't trade number 11 for, Scott Lawton. You're going to want a high quality player. So it's going to be difficult for them. And I can also say with certainty, it's probably not going to be Mitch Marner either. So
I got a suggestion. I already put this in the paper. I mean, to me, tough deal to stomach, but they'll do something. I would love to see the Sabres, make a move on Anthony Cirelli, because Tampa. If Tampa wants to keep Stamkos, they're going to have to do something.
That's a team again, and Stamkos wants to stay there. He's made it vocally known how upset he is that negotiations haven't really gone as planned, or as maybe he had hoped. So again, perfect example, Anthony Cirelli. That is a guy, like I said earlier with Anikas, a guy who would be fit in perfectly in your bottom six, but is versatile, could play in your top six very easily.
And you just traded Middlestat. People are saying, well, why did you trade Middlestat if you're going to go out and sign Martin Necas? But, you got Bowen Byram. There were reasons to trade him. Cirelli might be in trouble in Tampa simply because there's no room at the inn if they sign Stamkos. In Tampa, it's not like Brady Tkachuk where they're at the same plane. Tampa's above the Sabres and still thinks they are. But Tampa's getting to the point where they're close to aging out.
They need youth.
They need some youth, but they're still trying to win. They're going to try to middle it now. They've lost in the first round 2 years in a row, but I do think they're going to figure it out with Stamkos. I just don't think they're going to let that happen where he walks. But that's the kind of thing that can happen. The Sabres have to do something relatively seismic that you wouldn't expect, and that number, and it wouldn't just be for the number 11 pick. There'd be, a couple prospects going, whether it's Roseanne or Kulik or guys like that. There are too many of those guys. Somebody is going to go.
Agreed.
I don't know which one. Savoy, Kulik, Roseanne, somebody's going.
For me, if they're not trading the 11th overall pick, then one of those guys has to be packaged with something to get a piece in that's going to help this team make the playoffs next year. That's to my next point. I think a move like that is going to, in terms of Kevin Adams' job security. I know him and Terry have a great relationship, but if you stand put and don't do anything to add to this roster offensively for the second offseason in a row, it's hard for any owner, I don't care what your relationship is with the GM, to sit there and say, how do you not fire him? His job could be fine this offseason.
Right. It's okay to trade your prospects. Yes. You don't have to stockpile them and wrap them up in a bow and hang on to them their whole lives. We are a little bit too in hockey too cautious about that. Part of it is the cap. You need some cheap $900,000 players. I get that. But more teams need to take a little bit of the baseball mentality. And again, it's a different sport. There's no cap, whatever. There's luxury tax. But baseball, your prospects are as much to trade for your team as they are to develop to become members of your team. And in hockey, they're not used as much as pawns as they probably could be. And here's a case now where most times in hockey, you're in a much more of a long-term prism, and the Sabres have been obviously in a long-term prism. For a team that's missed the playoffs 13 years in a row and should be, quote, in another rebuild, the Sabres are not in any way, shape, or form in a long-term prism right now, guys. They are in win now. They publicly said win now. They have to not even win now. They have to win this year. So that means you might sacrifice a little bit of your prospect pool to win now. You might even overpay with your prospect pool to get a veteran NHL player. And that's okay. And it shouldn't, if they trade, I don't want to trade Matthew Savoy, but if they do it, people can't freak out about it because this is not a rebuild anymore. This is a must win this year now, not a rebuild.
I look at too, when it comes to the prospects that you just mentioned, I think Savoy probably has a leg up on anybody, to make that jump next year, just because, his play never really had any drop off season. I know he went back to junior and he dominated a level that he'd already dominated at, but like you look at Kulik and coming out of the World Junior Tournament, how like his play dropped off again. He's probably the only guy I can tell you why. I made a point too that. He's at the end of the day, he's a 19-year-old kid who might be burned out a little bit.
He's played 2 years.
Played so much hockey.
Yeah. And Savoy, there's two things with Savoy. The first thing is he's played almost no hockey in the AHL.
Yeah.
The second thing with Savoy is he's got to show that he can stay healthy. Because once he's gotten to professional hockey, he hasn't stayed healthy. Savoy was in Zach Benson's spot for training camp until he hurt in the prospect games and never got the chance to go to training camp. So maybe Zach Benson never even makes the team if Savoy is healthy. But, I would like to see what happens with Savoy this year in the AHL. I don't necessarily want to push him to the NHL right away. I'm not sure Kulik or Roseanne. And you know what? There's no failure if Kulik, Roseanne, and Savoy are all in Rochester next year.
No.
That's not a failure. But I think you might need to use one of them if you're going to make a package with that number 11 pick to help your team right now.
What do you think UPL gets for his next contract? What number?
Better be careful. Better be careful. I mean, to me, I loved his season, second half from January 1, but he can't get Linus Ullmark money.
No, I agree. I'm not a big proponent of overpaying goalies more than like six, like, what I mean? Like, it's so, I guess, like, especially in a market like Buffalo, like it's tough to win when you're paying your goalie over $7 million a year. You know what I mean? Like,
right now, I'm thinking 312. I'm not thinking, I'm not even going 15, 312, 313. He's still young. He's had half a season of elite goaltending in the NHL. Half a season, and they didn't make the playoffs. And they've got Devin Levi here, but I like UPL. I think he's the number one goalie far and away starting this season.
Do you think Levi starts in the NHL next year?
I got to be careful. And I mean, yes.
Yeah, I agree.
What are they going to do? They're going to go out and sign Ace Smith? No. It's going to be UPL and Levi.
And two, people kind of look at Levi and like, oh, he was supposed to be safer. Like, he didn't have a bad year, even from an NHL standpoint as a 21-year-old rookie. Like, he had some impressive wins this season. He beat Boston, he beat Toronto twice, he beat Tampa, he beat Vegas. You know what I mean? Like, he had some, and he went to the Bell Center at home. I know Montreal wasn't a good team, but you can imagine how much pressure he felt going, back home in front of his hometown. You know what I mean? Like, he got an impressive win there. I think that people look at that and look at the number and 899 save percentage and like, oh, no. I think if it was any other situation, if there wasn't the hype around Devin, that people would have been more than happy with the season he had. Obviously, with the expectations of the season to be playoffs, there were a lot of people that were upset. But I agree. I think Devin earned a spot in the NHL. I think he had a lights out year in the AHL.
He won 30 games.
What'd you say?
Devin Levi won 30 games this year.
Yep.
Between
While
still
having a winning record in the NHL too. He did have a winning record.
Right. So yeah, I thought it was a great development year. It was disappointing that the Amerks lost Game 5 to Syracuse, because I would have liked to have seen him get another series or even 2 more series and get Levi more high intensity games. But yeah, I thought his development, especially in the second half, went very well. UPL obviously developed tremendously. They just got to be careful. And to Ryan's point, it's tough with these playoffs, because you're right. I mean, our goalies like running backs, but boy, part of me says you better find one and pay him, because that's how you get to the end, as we saw here with Shesterkin, and as we're seeing with Bobrovsky, and not so much Stuart Skinner. The jury's out on him in some ways, but most of these teams, they're not messing around when they get to the end. They have their guy.
Yep. Agreed. Before we let you go, obviously in the offseason, you covered both the Bisons and obviously their major league affiliate, the Toronto Blue Jays. How's the season going? I'm a Red Sox fan, so I haven't had much to be happy about so far this season. So tell me about what's going on with the Bisons of Buffalo and the Toronto Blue Jays.
The Bisons have had a pretty interesting year. They've been okay. They're going to, fall short in the first half. There's about, I think, 16 games left in the first half, and then they reset it for the second half. You're looking at some development we've seen with the Blue Jays prospects here. Spencer Horwitz is a guy who should be in Toronto right now. I don't know what the Blue Jays are doing, why he's still here. He's hitting around .330. They've had a breakthrough from Stuart Baroa, their center fielder, who's on pace to steal 50 bases. The pitching, I did a huge story in the Buffalo News this week on Hagen Danner, a relief pitcher who has a great story, playing in the Little League World Series when he was 11 and being a hero in that Little League World Series. And he's a guy I think can help them in the bullpen here going forward. But the biggest impact on the Bisons is going to be what's going to happen in Toronto. By the time the All-Star game hits, do the Blue Jays have to reset? Do they have to think about trading Vladimir Guerrero Jr. or Bo Bichette? Ross Atkins, the GM this week, said, no, that's not on our radar. Well, it's the first week of June. Let's see if it's on his radar in the middle of July. If they continue to be in last place in the AL East, are you going to give them big money deals? Do they want to sign big money deals, come next year? So the Blue Jays have some major decisions to make. Ownership has some decisions to make on Ross Atkins. And Ross Atkins has to make a decision on John Schneider and the manager. So there's a lot of things going on in Toronto that are going to impact what goes on in Buffalo. Some of these guys in Buffalo could be trade tokens for the Blue Jays too. So the trade deadline is often a nervous time in baseball, like any sport, but people forget the trade deadline in baseball is a very nervous time in a AAA clubhouse. And I think we're going to see that in Buffalo this year.
Any thoughts, Ryan? I know you follow the game a little bit too.
Well, my thoughts, I don't watch the Bisons as closely as Mike does, because our focus here in Southern Ontario, of course, is firmly fixed on the Major League club. And they've played like anything but a Major League club. Like this is not a Major League Baseball team the way that they're playing right now. Like, let's just, be frank. The Toronto Blue Jays are literally up here, like, it's on the radio every day. It doesn't matter if you tune into Sportsnet and listen to Jays Talk with Jeff Blair and Kevin Barker, or you tune into Overdrive on TSN. The Toronto Blue Jays are a joke right now. They really are. They're being run terribly. Ross Atkins needs to go. I was a big proponent that he should have been let go last year. And the way that this year's playing out, he will most certainly be out of a job next year. They've emptied out their high-end prospects, and they did that to get guys, to be fair, like Barrios, who, he started off pretty terribly in Toronto. He's turned into an absolute gem for them. But when you look at their top prospects and you look around even just the AL East, their farm system right now pales in comparison to all the teams they're chasing. And they are chasing all of them. They're dead last in the division. And then when you look at the core of the team and the way that they're built, this was supposed to be a team that would never suffer from a power outage in terms of hitting home runs, generating consistent offense, and getting guys brought in when they're on base. They are bottom third, if not in the bottom three, in every major statistical category when it comes to generating offense, including raw power numbers, OBP, runners in scoring position, scoring with runners in scoring position, and team batting average and OBP. It's unbelievable. And OPS, by the way. It's unbelievable to me watching this team 3 years ago when Vladimir Guerrero Jr. popped off, and if not for arguably the greatest season by an individual in baseball history with Shohei Ohtani, he would have been a runaway MVP that year when he hit 48 dingers. But to look at them now, it's incredible. And he's an interesting case study. And Mike noted this and why it could be a turbulent time for the Bisons. The Jays have a massive question mark in front of them over the next month and a half. Jeff Passan was on Sportsnet up here today talking about it. They have to decide, is Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and Bo Bichette truly the spine of this team for the next 7 to 8 years? Vladimir Guerrero Jr. in the offseason got awarded the highest arbitration one-year contract in baseball history. He makes $18.48 million. That was on a one-year deal. He's turned his season around in terms of raw batting numbers. He's getting on base way more. He's hitting .330 over the last 3 weeks, and he's driving runs in. The power's still not there. He's still only got 5 home runs, but he's at least teetering in a positive direction. Bo Bichette is a mess right now. I don't know what's happened to the kid. Over the last 2.5 years, nobody in the AL has more hits than Bo Bichette. His game has regressed. And then they have a lot of problems with injuries. Like George Springer, the biggest deal that the team's ever handed out in free agency, that guy's hurt all the time. He's healthy this year, and he's contributing nothing at the plate. Yeah, he's still diving around and making great defensive plays. He offers them nothing at the plate. Kevin Kiermaier came back. I don't get the impression they really wanted him back, but he was sitting there and they didn't get Ohtani. So they thought, well, I guess we might as well bring Kiermaier back. And the interest on him wasn't as high as he hoped. He's a black hole at the plate too. And we had Rob Longley from the Toronto Sun on our show last week. And I asked him, the dugout this year looks unbelievably full. Like, what's going on down there? And he said, no, you're not imagining things. They have no less than 6 hitting coaches / consultants. It's unbelievable. There's way too many cooks in the kitchen. They rely way too much on analytics and numbers. A computer spreadsheet is running that team, and fans up here, including myself, are absolutely sick of it. This would never happen. It's a complete pipe dream. If I was Ed Rogers, who is the 5th richest owner in baseball, by the way, just based on raw money, in American dollars, by the way. In the offseason, I would do anything. I would call his phone. I'd leave him 700 voicemails. I'd camp outside his apartment. I would do anything to get Theo Epstein to come to Toronto. It's not going to happen, but I would do anything to get that guy to come here. He ended the curse of the Bambino. He ended the
I made
curse
a funny
of the,
face
of
a
the
few
goat.
minutes ago, and you may have noticed that because I looked at the scoreboard. Did you see what the score was tonight? The Blue Jays they're losing 8-1 Orioles, and
it's unbelievable.
Yeah, they don't play what they.
It's really unbelievable.
I golf clap all the wins they had over the Pirates and White Sox. Give me a break.
Yeah, woo! The White Sox, hooray!
Yeah, they're back playing real schedule. They're getting their butts kicked, and they're just not going anywhere. And they've got some serious decisions to make that will have some impact in Buffalo.
Absolutely.
And Vlad Guerrero is such a fun player to watch too, especially when he's on his game. We had the opportunity to see him in his early development here in Buffalo, and just it kind of blows my mind. 2 years, like a couple years removed from that we're having this conversation that should the Blue Jays consider trading that guy?
Well,
he is still only 26.
too many subtractions. I mean, the 2021 season was their best season. They had Teoscar Hernandez, Lourdes Gurriel, and Marcus Semien. And they missed the playoffs, guys. And don't forget, they missed the playoffs by one game. And what happened in 2021? They went 1-7 against the Yankees, Red Sox, and Rays at Salem Field. And they missed the playoffs by one game in Vladdy's best year. They're going to forever rue that. They have never been the same team since.
Yep.
Yeah, and they never should have let Marcus Semien go. Ross Atkins didn't want to pay him. I thought that was an absolute joke. He set a record for offensive numbers by a second baseman in a single season and was a true leader in that clubhouse. And letting him go and go to Texas and win a World Series will forever be a stain on the legacy of Ross Atkins and Mark Shapiro in Toronto. And again, it'll never happen. If they could get Epstein, that he's one of the only guys, in my opinion, that could actually tangibly turn this around. Like I said, he ended the curse of the Bambino. He ended the curse of the Billy Goat. Now we need him to come to Toronto and end the curse of the computer. And I'm just over it. I'm just so over it. I'm floored by the amount of guys that they let walk, and the whole narrative, Mike, you mentioned letting Teoscar go, Lourdes Gurriel go, Marcus Semien, was that, well, the team's not serious enough. They're having too much fun. There's too much fun happening. Home run, they're hitting too many home runs, and the jacket's on, and it's too much, and they're throwing peanuts at each other.
Normally,
the home run jacket's back now.
The fun police normally comes from the media.
Oh,
the fun police in Toronto came from within their own organization.
You know, you hear stuff like this, it makes me think about what year was it? The year that the Red Sox, blew up their roster. It was after Beckett and all that. They were caught drinking in the clubhouse during the season, where they had that 15-game lead on the wild card, and they blew it in the final game of the season against the Yankees.
It's a chicken and beer, 2011.
Yep. What that was? They won in 2004. They ended the curse of the Bambino was in 2004.
Yep.
Will this have been in 2009?
No, it was 11.
2011. Sorry, yes.
They lost the last game in Baltimore to get knocked out the night the Rays hit the home run to beat the Yankees and get.
Yep. My uncle, who was the whole reason why I'm a Red Sox fan, said the Yankees laid down like a $2 whore that night because they didn't want to play the Red Sox in the playoffs.
Red Sox figured it out and won again in 13 and won again in 18. They figured it out. The Blue Jays haven't figured out. The Blue Jays have not won a postseason game since when? Since 2016 was the last time they won a game when the
wild card.
One game in the ALCS against Cleveland. That's been it.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, they did win that game. Yeah, against Cleveland.
My point is that the next season, after they blew up the roster, they got rid of those guys, the guys like Beckett and I forget who else. But they brought in Shane Victorino, they brought in Mike Napoli, and me in my opinion, I'm looking at a picture of him right now putting the World Series trophy on the Boston Marathon finish line. They got Johnny Gomes. You want to talk about role players?
Oh, you're forgetting though now. They up after the chicken and beer in 2012. 2012, they finished in last place with Bobby Valentine. Then they brought in.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Victorino, Johnny Gomes, Napoli, those guys, and won the World Series in 2013. So it did take 2 years.
Yeah. But they went and brought in, and I've always said this with the Sabres when it comes to role players. You guys got to get glue guys. And I remember being at Fenway during that magical season where they were punting their helmets into the stands after a walk-off home run. You talk about having too much fun. But that team had so much fun, and it was all because of guys like Napoli and Gomes and stuff like that. Really brought that locker room together. And, you talk about the Blue Jays like this, makes me think of that, man. And I know if there's a guy that probably hates analytics and a spreadsheet more than me, it's probably you, Mike, because I can't stand teams run strictly on numbers and analytics, because it's just it's a nice tool to have, but it's not the end all be all. And teams like that are the point. You can't really, sometimes you take stuff like that, just having a couple good culture guys and glue guys in your locker room. Maybe they're not the most analytically the most best analytical sweethearts, but I remember watching a game at Fenway, and it was just some random game against the Diamondbacks, and they were losing like 6-2 going into the seventh, and so whatever. And it was a long drive to the monster, and Johnny Gomes is hauling his ass back there. Mind you, they're losing by like 5 runs at the time, I think it was. And he jumped right into that wall. You could hear him make impact, caught that ball, and you would have thought they just won a playoff game the way that crowd reacted. And slowly but surely, a hit here, a run there, ended with a Daniel Nava walk-off single up in center field. And again, you would have thought they just won a playoff game with the way that crowd reacted. It was so cool to be a part of it. But like, to the point, it's just like, you just need those type of guys on your team. And you mentioned how they got rid of guys like Semien because they were having too much fun. Like, I don't know, man. I like watching guys have fun. I love watching guys sometimes not take things too seriously because, that's at the end of the day, baseball is America's pastime, right? Like you grew up a kid loving this game. Sometimes you don't want to take yourself too seriously. And I don't know, maybe that's what the Blue Jays need. And you mentioned a name like Theo Epstein, Ryan, and there isn't a guy more built to turn that franchise around than Theo Epstein.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's just a case where, I heard somebody say this the other day, and it sort of rings true. Like, it was a quote that Brian Burke said, and this was after his time as Leafs GM. And he said, the media in Toronto and the fans there are weird. They'll run the GM out of town before they run players out of town. And to a degree, that's true. And I don't know if there's a sports figure right now in Toronto at this current time. The Leafs haven't played in a while, guys. At this current moment, I don't know if there's a sports figure in Toronto that's more despised than Ross Atkins. And I just think it's because he doesn't come across as a baseball guy. You know what I mean? Just a guy. And Theo Epstein does. Like, think about the impacts. Theo Epstein completely revamped and turned around and won at the time in what I would call, outside of the Yankees, the 2 toughest market. He took back-to-back the 2 toughest jobs in baseball and 2 of the toughest jobs in sports in general. Walking in to try and help the Red Sox end the curse of the Bambino. And then he goes and ends a 108 record championship drought with the Cubs. Like, he's a guy that gets it. And when you consider how different those fan bases are, how different those markets are, they both demand greatness and want greatness. They're passionate fans, very different markets. And he was able to ingratiate himself to both of those markets with flying colors. And he made the teams fun to watch again. He completely revamped the fan experience and made it fun to be a fan again. And he made players want to go there. I mean, the Red Sox never really had this problem outside of some of those tough stretches in the 90s. But the Cubs had a lot of trouble getting big guys to come and play there. And you talk about glue guys, too. I'm sure, you guys have probably seen that Pearl Jam documentary the year that the Cubs ended up winning and whatever. Ben Zobrist and Dexter Fowler, 2 guys that would never show up in conversations of all-time great players. Those 2 guys were 2 of the most popular guys in that clubhouse that year. And Ben Zobrist and Dexter Fowler each had 3 huge clutch hits on the way to that World Series, including a game-tying double by Zobrist in Game 5 of that World Series. Remember, Cleveland was up 3-1. Like, the Cubs almost did it to their fans again. And Benny Zobrist had a huge double.
Yeah, I mean, Jason Hayward did the speech in in Game 7 during the rain delay. David Ross hit a home run. I mean, that team was full of complementary players. There weren't superstars by any stretch in that Cubs team.
Glue guys.
Yeah, and the Blue Jays don't have it. They're trying to build a team with superstars, and then their analytics just throw everything off. There's too many coaches. There's an assistant hitting coach and an offensive coordinator, And then what did the analytics team do? They think they're the smartest guys in the room. And we saw that in the playoff game last year by taking Barrios out in the fourth inning.
Oh.
They don't have the monopoly on wisdom, and they're trying to act like they do. And that's something you have to watch in hockey too, is don't act like you're the smartest guys in the room. And the Sabres aren't guilty of that by any stretch. Some teams are. Some teams try to just think they're smarter than you. I think eventually the Pittsburgh Penguins fell victim to that.
Yep.
But it's tough. It's tough in sports, and you can't overthink. Sometimes you have to let guys play. And I don't think the Blue Jays are really being let play a lot, and that's a negative factor for them. But, baseball and hockey are very different in some ways, but they're very similar too. They're both heavily induced with analytics, and, there are good things about it and bad things about it, and some teams can overload on it. And I think the Blue Jays right now are a team that's overloaded on analytics to their huge detriment.
Yeah, you talk about analytics, and I think it was you mentioned earlier, Drury, when it came to the Sabres. It's kind of surprising that the Sabres failed so much, and when it came to the details of the game, considering how much they have invested in their analytics department. So with Koromanos obviously leading, I think he's been talked about a lot in in GM openings. Will continue to be talked about going forward. But Mike, thank you so much for coming on with us, man. I couldn't appreciate it more. Every time you're on with us, man, it's a blast. You're my favorite interview by and far. So
thank you very much. I appreciate it as always.
Not a problem, man. Remember, it's been brought to you by Fatty Beer Company, Western New York's premier market and tap room, with over 300 beers to choose from and 8 different Western New York locations with live music, entertainment, and trivia at all 8 locations. And of course, both kid and dog friendly, and Buffalo logo apparel. One of the best places to get all of your locally designed Buffalo sports apparel needs. Make sure you check out their Zubaz golf polos and the new specifically designed Buffalo logo golf polo for their upcoming golf tournament coming up here in July. And of course, all of their hats are always my favorite. Go check them out at Buffalo Logo Co. on Instagram and Twitter, at Fatty Beer, Instagram and Twitter. I am Duane for Mr. Ryan Drury from the Instigating Podcast, and of course, Mr. Mike Harrington from the Buffalo News. Make sure you go check him out on Twitter. And what are your handles again, Mike, if people want to follow you?
I am Harrington, and everyone should follow everything at buffalonews.com.
Absolutely, especially right now, more than any, especially now more than ever. We will see you again sometime here during this final series. We're definitely going to do some post-game shows. Me and Hurls have already talked about it. And we'll talk to you guys later. As always, enjoy your week. Enjoy this weather. And you picked the Oilers, correct, Mike?
Oilers in 6.
Oilers in 6, Ryan?
Well, I had the Rangers Dallas in the Cup final, so my allegiances are completely gone now. I just think it would be great for Canada. Give me Oilers in 7.
Up until the head coach's comments about the Bills, taking a little bit of stab at the Bills earlier today, I had the Oilers. I'm still going to go with the Oilers, though. I'm going to root for McDavid to win his first cup, because I think it would be tragic if that guy never won a cup. So I'm going to go Oilers in 6 as well. It will be a hard-fought series, though. Unfortunately, I think 2 years in a row, I don't think Florida gets it done. Talk to you guys later. And as always, go Sabres.